Dr. Yair Argon is a professor in the Department of Pathology and Lab Medicine in the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. He's also associated with Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And we will be discussing the issues around the vaccine and sorting out information that has been tossed around, truth from fiction, so that you can more easily make up your own mind. The first clip is that of a viral clip that went viral after a local board was presented with this physician that basically rebuted the entire policy that they put forth, and that's what this clip is all about.
I'm actually a functional family medicine physician. That means I am specially trained in immunology and inflammation regulation. And everything being recommended by the CDC and the State Board of Health is actually contrary to all the rules of science. So things you should know about coronavirus and all other respiratory viruses: they are spread by aerosol particles, which are small enough to go through every mask. By the way, the literature that supports all of that is in a flash drive that we presented to you. It's been given to the Secretary. As a matter of fact, it quotes at least 3 studies sponsored by the NIH to that exact fact, even though the CDC and the NIH have chosen to ignore the very science that they paid to have done.
Yeah, so basically his claim that masks cannot filter the virus, first of all, I looked into that. I don't believe that's true. It may be true of some substandard masks, but there are definitely masks that do filter those particles, and so I think that claim is kind of
yeah, I mean, the N95 mask is much more efficient in filtering aerosol particles than the surgical masks, and which we use routinely. So it's a relative thing. Yeah.
And I believe that even some multi-layered cloth masks, right, according to the CDC, high thread cotton with rayon or some right, another electrostatic layer of fabric, polymer fabric is as efficient apparently as
right,
as the N95.
This is, I think, the idea behind masks is to slow down the virus and limit how many virus particles reach your own nostrils. And I don't know why he claims that the NIH ignored, or the scientific community ignored, these data. It's just not as absolute as he presents it.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, and so let me play another part of his claim here.
That is why you keep struggling with this, is because you cannot make these viruses go away. The natural history of all respiratory viruses is that they circulate all year long, waiting for the immune system to get sick through the winter or become deranged, as has happened recently with these vaccines, and then they cause symptomatic disease. Because they cannot be filtered out, and they have animal reservoirs, and this is a very important point, no one can make this virus go away. The CDC has managed to convince everybody that we can handle this like we did smallpox, where we could make a virus go away. Smallpox had no animal reservoirs. The only thing it learned to infect was humans. That's why we were able to make that virus go away. That will not happen with this any more than it will with influenza, the common cold, respiratory syncytial virus, adenoviral respiratory syndromes, or anything else that has animal reservoirs. So the reason you can't do this is because you're trying to do something which has already been tried and can't be done.
He says that since we have a animal reservoir of the virus, we're not going to ever be able to get this out of the system. Is that correct?
I don't know if it's correct, if it's factually correct, but it's very reasonable to expect that, just like with other viruses, again, by by comparison to viruses that we have had long exposure to and experience with, it's probably correct that it will be unlikely that we'll ever get rid of all the virus. And we'll just have to live with this virus just like we live with other viruses.
Mhm. And if I am correct, the only virus that we really got completely rid of was smallpox. Is that?
Yeah, and even that, there's some questions about whether we totally got rid of it. There's breakthrough reports every few years. So, it just illustrates the fact that the goal line is not zero. The goal line is just small number.
Right, right. And Mr. K says if you can breathe through it, I guess he's referring to the masks, it doesn't filter out aerosol virus particles. Well, that's not quite correct. If you're looking at N95 or N99 filters, they filter out about 95 or 99 respondingly.
Right. That's the essence of the designation N95 or N99. Yeah.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as N100. I will give the guy that.
Yeah. Let's see what else the gentleman was alleging here.
Equally important is that vaccination changes none of this, especially with this vaccine. And I would hope this board would start asking itself, before it considers taking the advice of the CDC, the NIH, and the State Board of Health, why we are doing things about this that we didn't do for the common cold, influenza, or respiratory syncytial virus. And then ask yourself, why is a vaccine that is supposedly so effective having a breakout in the middle of the summer when respiratory viral syndromes don't do that? And to help you understand that, you need to know the condition that is called antibody-mediated viral enhancement. That is a condition done when vaccines work wrong, as they did in every coronavirus study done in animals on coronaviruses after the SARS outbreak, and done in respiratory syncytial virus, where a vaccine used in a vulnerable individual done the wrong way, which cannot be done right for a respiratory virus which has a very low pathogenicity rate, causes the immune system to actually fight the virus wrong and let the virus become worse than it would with native infection. And that is why you are seeing an outbreak right now. In fact, in that flash drive you're going to have coming to you and in the emails with 6 Extra will be a study showing that 75% of people who had COVID-19 positive symptom cases in Barnstable, Massachusetts outbreak were fully vaccinated.
Yeah, well, there's several things. He conflated a number of issues, and so there's not a single answer to that claim, but multiple ones. I hope I remember all the things he said. So first, the issue of seasonality. I agree. This is one of the strange features of this coronavirus, is that it does not obey the expected seasonality that, say, flu does every season. The reason we get vaccinated with flu in my workplace, in my university, every September is because flu becomes an issue in November and December and January. And this virus may not follow that. It doesn't mean that, it will not, but it may not follow that. And the best, but that's, that's one of the features of this virus that still needs to be addressed and understood, and currently it is not, right? And the breakthrough infection that he's talking about happened in Massachusetts just last month during the summer.
But his insinuation is here that that indicates that that the vaccine itself has worsened the situation and actually caused those, because the virus is acting. And
that's another one of those statements that he takes to an extreme. You simply have to think back to last summer. There was the caseload of coronaviruses last summer, before there was any vaccine, also spiked. I don't remember if this was the first spike of the disease or the second wave of the disease, but there was a wave last summer before any vaccine was available. So it's a property of the virus. It's not a property of the vaccine. And like I said, we'll undoubtedly need to understand that and why that is the case. And I acknowledge that this is a deficiency that needs to be understood in our knowledge of how to fight this virus.
Yeah, and another thing that has to be pointed out is that the biggest spike that happened during summer season was actually in the southern part of the country where the temperatures are higher. So that kind of flies in the face. And the point here is also that those were the states, incidentally, that had the lowest rate of vaccination. So his argument here kind of falls on its face, because if the vaccine was the one that's causing this abnormal behavior of the virus, that would have not happened in Alabama and all these states. It would have happened up in the north where the weather is where the vaccine levels were higher.
Right, and it would not have been expected to happen in breakthrough things in Massachusetts this summer, where most of the people there were vaccinated. So it's a mystery. I think it's a mystery, but I think it's too early to attribute it to one knowledge or another, and therefore conclude about how we act in the future.
Okay, let's return to his statement here.
Therefore, there is no reason for treating any person vaccinated any differently than any person unvaccinated. You should also know that no vaccine, even the ones I support and would give to myself and my children, ever stops infection. In 2014, there was outbreak of mumps in the National Hockey League. The only people who came down the symptoms were the people who were unvaccinated or unknown vaccine status. Boy, that sounds like a great argument for vaccines. But a question that you should ask yourself, knowing that half of the people who came down with symptomatic disease had no contact with an unvaccinated or unknown vaccine status individual, where did they get the disease? And the answer was from the vaccinated individuals. No vaccine prevents you from getting infection. You get infected, you shed pathogen. This is especially true of viral respiratory pathogens. You just don't get symptomatic from it. So you cannot stop spread. You cannot make these numbers that you've planned on get better by doing any of the things you're doing, because that is the nature of viral respiratory pathogens. And you can't prevent it with a vaccine because they don't do the very thing you're wanting them to do.
Oh, is he right? Does vaccine stop getting infected or not? Does it stop infection?
So again, he's conflating a number of things, and some of them we already touched on. In principle, he's correct that no vaccine is meant to or able to completely stop, but it's a question of what do you define as stop? Do you want to eliminate 100% of sick people, or do you want to shoot for another goal, like limiting the severity of the infection if infection happens? Those are different goals, and one is more realistic, and 100% is, as I said, not a realistic expectation. Yeah, I mean, I would actually argue that in terms of the vaccine, the goal of the vaccine from the beginning had not been as ambitious as the doctor presents it. Nobody, myself, I was surprised when the results came in of the clinical trial came in with efficacy in the 90 percentile. With other vaccines, we don't expect it, and we accept vaccines that are efficient, effective, much lower percentage. The flu vaccine, some years, is no more than flipping a coin, 50-50. In other years, it works better. So it's all a question of relative diminution of damage, and the damage caused versus the risk from the infection. The other thing the guy is conflating is attributing this to a vaccine. It's an issue of the virus. It's not an issue of the vaccine, and it's a question of how much virus you're exposed to, and how little virus will be safe. We still don't know. We haven't had enough exposure.
And I think he's clinging to a technicality here by saying that the virus does not stop infection. It does not stop infection because it still can infect, but it's not. It can stop its effect on the infected person, and it also can reduce the viral load that that person spews into the air surrounding and surrounding other people who may catch it. So all of these things
Exactly.
all together are like helping reduce the amount of the spreading significantly.
Right, right. And presumably, each individual to develop a severe disease or severe reaction needs to be exposed to a lot more virus, and a larger area of the, let's say, the lungs have to be exposed to it than in a more benign or less severe case. So it's all a numbers game of how much you lower the risk, and after that, how much your body can take if you have infection. It's just like with the flu. Some people, are
Right,
weather the flu better than other people. Some
right.
people are more sensitive.
Okay, and here he continues.
You'll be chasing this the remainder of your life until you recognize that the Center for Disease Control and the Indiana State Board of Health are giving you very bad scientific guidance. And instead, read the articles that are going to come on the email and are on this flash drive, and listen to the people in this audience here tonight who actually have recognized the advice they are getting from the CDC and the NIH is counterfactual. And that's why you're still fighting this with this vaccine that supposedly was going to make all of this go away, but has suddenly managed to make an outbreak of COVID-19 develop in the middle of the summer when vitamin D levels are at their highest. By the way, the other thing that would be necessary any vaccine restriction to be considered is if there were no other treatment available. And I can tell you, having treated over 15 COVID-19 patients, that between active loading with vitamin D, ivermectin, and zinc, that there is not a single person who has come anywhere near the hospital. And we already have studies that show that if you achieve a 25 hydroxy vitamin D level greater than 55, your risk of COVID-19 death will drop down to 1/4 of the population average for the United States.
Your response.
Well, so first, I again, it's not a black and white alternative type of a situation. I think very few reasonable people will object to treatments that work in conjunction with a vaccine, but that doesn't mean that one should not get the vaccine. Okay. The treatments are addressing a different phase of the expansion of the viruses and the reaction to the viruses than the vaccine does. Okay. The COVID vaccine that most of us got, is meant to limit how many viral spike protein, the so-called spike protein, enter cells that have the receptor. Fine. The other treatments that the guy is talking about are metabolic treatments that deal with the stages afterwards. And there's no logical reason to pit one against the other. They both work and both will be fine. The other thing I would like to say about his treatment evidence, that his own words expose a big deficiency in the thinking. 15 patients is anecdotal for most serious treatments. 15 patients is anecdotal, and a quarter, if the effect was a quarter of 15 patients, what's that, 3-4 people? So it's totally anecdotal. The studies that people would like to see are large number of studies. People are injected with a particular agent aimed to do something, and a control group usually is larger that is not injected. And then you look and calculate how many cases responded poorly or didn't respond poorly, and you do the statistical evaluation based on that. 15 patients is a very, very small number and anecdotal. It may very well work. I know that ivermectin, there's been a study in Mexico that included 70,000 people, okay? And the conclusion was that ivermectin may help. All right. Ivermectin, by the way, is not an antiviral agent. It's not, it has some kind of poorly understood side effect but its main goal in the development of ivermectin was against parasitic worms, not against totally different pathogen than the viruses that we're talking about. And nobody knows why it can improve the situation. But even if it can improve the situation, it doesn't negate the use of vaccinations.
And some of these tests that were done were actually preclinical, correct? Like they were done for in vitro in test tube
Right.
or in
Well,
other
in that,
animals. And what can you conclude on basis of that as far as
right. So those obviously are even further. There's so many ifs and buts accepting those conclusions. I work with cells in culture all the time, but it's well known and well accepted that whatever conclusion I draw from the cells in culture then has to be expanded or replicated or projected onto whole organisms, because that's different from infecting just a population of pure population of cells. So yeah, I agree. But even the ivermectin studies that were done on 70,000 people, there was one study, I think it was done in Mexico, and there was a fairly large number, and I don't remember exactly the improvement. I can't quote percentages. Um, it was an impressive number. Okay, so now what? If I were this doctor, I would say, why don't the NIH now put a lot of money and a lot of resources behind finding out why that ivermectin works and how it can complement the traditional prevention or diminution of infection that we get from a vaccine. They're not mutually exclusive.
right. Let's play the last part of this guy's thing.
So if you were going to discriminate based upon vaccine, you should also discriminate based upon 25-hydroxyvitamin D level, zinc taste test response, and probably previous infection, since there are also studies on that flash drive that show that people who have recovered from COVID-19 infection actually get no benefit from vaccination at all, no reduction in symptoms, no reduction in hospitalization, and suffer 2 to 4 times the rate of side effects if they are subsequently vaccinated. Therefore, the policies that you are basing on are totally counterfactual. I don't blame this board for that, because I know you aren't scientists and you've thought it was reasonable to listen to the CDC, NIH, and the Indiana State Board of Health. But I would encourage that instead you listen to the people out here in this audience and read what's on that data drive. And if anybody here in this board has any questions about anything on that, I will happily come back and sit with you individually if you would like to explain the science behind this. And if you're worried about being sued by somebody because you don't follow the guidance of the CDC and the NIH, I will tell you have a free pro bono expert testimony at your disposal. I will testify in defense of this board, turning down all these recommendations for free at any time in any court. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that seemed to me like completely contrary to what we have been learning so far. What would you say?
Well, it's very nice of him for offering legal assistance to the board. But the question is, how to act on what we know about. Again, I think I applaud his commitment to the problem. We all like to protect children, and particularly we all like to protect old people as well, like ourselves. I don't think there's any nefarious motivation behind the CDC or behind the NIH, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know why he has to slip to that kind of a language that implies that the advice is malicious or the advice is deliberately misleading people.
Right. Okay, so that's basically that covers this thing. I wanted to go a little bit about the vaccine itself and the new technology that was the relatively new type of vaccine that was used in this situation. And to do that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the virus itself, the coronavirus itself, way it's constructed and what those spikes are.
Mhm.
So if you wanna.
Yeah. So those red nubbins, by the way, each one of them is consists of three parts, as you can see. So flower like forest. Those are the spike proteins that each virus particle exposes on its surface, and those are the means by which the virus attaches itself to cellular proteins. In the case of this particular virus, it attaches itself to primarily, probably not exclusively, primarily to a protein called ACE2. Um, and ACE2 is found on respiratory cells, epithelial cells. It actually is expressed on many, many, many cells. So a question that one can ask, and we still don't have a precise answer to, is what makes a particular cell more susceptible. So once it sees the spike protein, it actually takes up the virus into itself, and therefore commits this particular cell to the whole cascade of bad effects of the virus and replication of the virus inside the cell. Do you want me to give more details about viral infections and receptors for viruses?
Yeah, but basically, I just wanted to describe this process, and it's really interesting how those spikes work, because they are shape shifting basically, right? They start with an open configuration, and then they completely change their configuration on a molecular level to draw the virus body closer to the cell, and then fuse between them, and therefore integrate the genetic content of the virus into the cell.
Correct. Yeah, and it's not. I mean, in the general principle of it is again shared by many other viruses, that the protein that binds to the receptor on the surface of the cell changes its configuration, as you say, in preparation to or during the process of injecting the genetic material into the cell.
And the gymnastics of that is quite amazing. Here's an animation showing how this process happens, and it's almost hard to believe that this is happening on such a nanoscale. Here it goes. This is the spike in its open configuration. The bottom is the outer side of the spike, and the cell is below. There's an ACE2 receptor on the surface of the cell, and that gets connected with the open configuration, and it changes the spike into its almost like a pin shape that then and here we see the virus getting fused with quite amazing.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
And so this is what basically what the vaccine has done, from my understanding, is they took the spikes only themselves, just the spike part, and use that in order to generate antibodies in the vaccination process, and so there's really no unlike the previous technologies of where the weakened virus was used. In this case, there's no whole virus. There's no possible way for the virus to inject its genetic matter into cells. The only thing with that is the possibility that there is some effect of the spikes themselves. There's some possibility that the spikes themselves are that they're
toxic.
That they're cytotoxic, and this was covered. This was actually an issue that was raised by Dr. Malone, Robert Malone, who was one of the fathers of this whole vaccine form. And so here's a little clip from that.
So this question of the activity of the spike really developed after well into the outbreak. And it was coupled with people asking what was the activity of the virus itself using cell culture, animal models, organoids. Organoids is kind of a new term for a lot of us. These are human-like organs that are grown in a test tube using stem cell technology. And they've been developed basically to enable alternatives to animal models and ability to capture data from human tissues without having to do human experiments. So a series of experiments were done after they initiated the development of the vaccines that ask questions about the toxicity of the virus, how it would interact with brain cells, blood-brain barrier, vascular endothelium, cells in general, etc. And then as that science developed, people started asking, well, how much of these things that we are seeing are due to this part of the virus or that part of the virus? And one of the things they focused on was this knob of three things that kind of sticks out that we call spike. Spike is not like you would see on the collar of a fighting dog or something like that. It's not a bunch of sharp things that come out. It's a bunch of little knobs of protein that are what the virus uses to stick to the cells that it wants to infect. And it also has this characteristic that it changes its shape as it infects, like a lot of the virus receptors do, a lot of the receptor ligand interactions. The virus first binds in an open conformation to its target, and then it undergoes a change in shape that helps trigger the ability of the virus to enter the cell. Spike does this. And so there was data started emerging really last fall with human organoids and with mouse models, and then with other tissue models and some whole animal studies, including a nice one from the Salk Institute, my alma mater, that in fact, despite what Reuters says, yes, spike is cytotoxic. And spike also opens the blood-brain barrier in animal models and in human organoids. And then there's this whole group of things around symptoms, human symptoms, after infection and development of this disease that we call COVID, and the long-term COVID that we call long COVID, and some of the side effects that people have reported with the adenovirus-based genetic vaccines first. So here in the States, we call it the J&J product. And we found out that the J&J product was causing blood clotting. Blood clotting is a major problem with the disease. It's one of the core problems. And the vaccine was also causing blood clotting. That's kind of odd. Now we're seeing that the RNA vaccines, a different genetic vaccine technology that also expresses the spike protein, is triggering some of those same symptoms in some small subset of people. And in some small subset of people, they also have clotting problems, including these brain clots, which are worrisome. But that's very rare. And I don't want to alert the audience or scare you. I have no interest in spooking everybody and making a big kerfuffle. Some people enjoy that. I don't. These vaccines work. They're saving lives. But in some people, they're having these adverse events. And the odd thing is that those adverse events seem to overlap with some of the symptoms of the disease that's caused by the whole virus. and they seem to overlap between the two different genetic technologies that are used for the vaccines. And they overlap with some of the things that we know that spike can do by itself. And so this is one of those, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it. It looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, might be a duck. And it might be that these known toxicities associated with the wild type spike protein might be also associated with the engineered spike protein that is used as the antigen in these vaccines. And right now, we don't know that's the case for sure, but it kind of looks like it might be.
So, thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm perfectly happy to conclude, as Dr. Malone seemed to conclude, that it's some in the toxicity is inherent in a virus. But I would point out, and I would underscore what he said, that the toxicity is only rare. The vast majority of people who receive the vaccine do not respond that way. So it's obviously very important to understand why some people, a few people, react negatively, have adverse effects, but that shouldn't, overshadow the point that most people, the vast majority of people who receive the vaccines, who receive the spike protein, do not react to the spike protein in that way.
And another one of the points that he has made is that they did some study somewhere where they were measuring the amount of these free-floating planktonian spikes that were circulating in the bloodstream, which was not supposed to happen in the vaccine. It was supposed to be localized. And they have found in some cases that the vaccine companies were supposed to conduct and show.
Right, but now we're talking about a slightly different aspect. Now we're talking about whether the regulatory process of accepting the side effects of the vaccine were considered properly by the regulatory authorities. Before, we were focusing on what are the activities of the protein itself, and what are the activity of what are the minuses and the pluses in injecting the spike protein into people.
Right. Nevertheless, I do have to admit that I find it disturbing that such a thing could happen after supposedly rigorous trials.
Yeah, I applaud that. I don't know the details. I don't know how many people had those effects. Before the vaccine was around, it was, I know of anecdotal observation. Again, I do not know the numbers countrywide of people that have vascular effects. And at first that was very surprising, because a respiratory virus wasn't supposed to infect blood vessels, right? But in fact, the ACE2 receptor is expressed on blood vessels. It actually expressed on blood vessels in numbers that are not that different from its expression on respiratory cells of the lung. So it's more complicated, and we need to understand it, but I think that the interesting thing is why some people do respond that way negatively, while most people don't respond to this. And
right.
We'll just have to, it requires more studies.
And this doctor has actually been criticized, and not just him, but a number of doctors who have raised those questions have been criticized because they have attempted to question the vaccines. So it's in a very politically charged environment right now, and that is something that he felt he was spared because of his status, but he finds disturbing. Here's what he has said about that.
So I was on a phone call with a Canadian physician that went from like 10 to midnight. And the gentleman is just pouring his heart out to me about his patients and how every time he files something that's an adverse event, it just gets immediately dismissed without any investigation. And he's telling me about what's happening in Canada from the government. And I'm listening to this, and I just keep having to say to him, there's nothing I can do for you. And I wake up in the morning and I'm like, aha, I know what I can do. And I built this logic structure around bioethics. And it was the bioethics of experimental vaccination for COVID. And it was published on Trial Site News. And the red pill metaphor from the Matrix keeps getting overused. But this thing is like a red pill. People that are in denial read it, or you walk them through the logic, and it just opens up their mind that it's not okay what's going on. The censorship isn't okay. The gaslighting of people who have symptoms, the censorship on social media, these things. Just to give one example, there was a Facebook group of kind of a contact group of people that were sharing stories about adverse events associated with vaccination. It was about 250 people strong, and it just got deleted. And if you're one of those people, if you kind of put yourself in their position for a moment, all around them, they're getting the message that you're crazy. You couldn't possibly be having vaccine-related adverse events because they don't happen. And so you participate in this shared experience with other people on social media, and then you get deleted. It's flat out depressing for these people.
Yeah. So that's the social aspect of it.
Yeah, and one shouldn't deny that kind of behavior happens. It can happen among educated people, but not educated people, all kinds of people, all walks of life, and it's not defensible. There should be free discussion and free disclosure. I'm not familiar with the example that he gives about the adverse events and the frequency of the adverse events, and surely they need to be reported. The mechanism for approving any treatment or any drug or any vaccine includes mandatory reporting of adverse effects. Actually, in fact, they separate between adverse effects that are reasonable and very severe adverse effects that need to be, separately disclosed. So I agree with Dr. Malone about the censorship being inappropriate. Yeah.
In a lot of the times, unfortunately, with the social media networks, it's people who have absolutely no knowledge or no.
Right, but he also implies that there was censorship at the level of the regulators, which ostensibly should have the right education to decide.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I'm not familiar with it. But for me, that's right now just an allegation. So I don't feel comfortable commenting on that.
On the media side of it, though, there's something called the Trusted News Initiative, which the BBC has signed on, and others, the organizations, and basically it's, I think their intent was a positive one, trying to reduce the number of false information or panic information. But on the other hand, it created this monster of having too much power in filtering out information that may be important for a discussion. And the other aspect that concerns me is that looking at the things that have been coming out of the CDC from the beginning, from Dr. Fauci. Often they seem to be simplifying things with the understanding that the general public could not possibly understand the detailed information or the nuances, and I think that's damaging, because if you create a simplified version that then falls flat because of the fact that it hasn't been exact or precise, and that comes to light, that creates a backlash of trust and is counterproductive.
Yeah, I fully agree with it. I understand both sides of it. I understand, as a scientist, I understand, and I'm confronted often with the need when I explain my work to so-called lay people, and I don't think lay people are unintelligent. Quite the contrary. They're just not experts in the fact the way I am. So when I explain to them, I need to simplify the observation or simplify what I describe, much like you just did with the cartoons of the spike protein penetrating the cells. That's in itself is a simplification or visualization of something that not all the details are worked out yet, but it gives it one a concept of what happens. So you need to simplify stuff. I think there's an equal so that's on the part of the news deliverer, the Dr. Fauci's of the world. But there's also a responsibility on the audience. If you want to understand things more deeply, you have to be willing to get into the complexity of stuff. You can't understand complex, and these are very complex interaction at a molecular level, without diving, headstrong into the complexity. That takes more time. That takes more patience. You can't get it in a 30-second or 5-second elevator pitch or some such explanations.
In a piece Dove said, this has made it absolutely terrifying for people like me who are allergic to the vaccine. Does any of the makeups of this vaccine, in terms of the biology of it, have to do with the allergic response, or is that part of the additional substances that are used to stabilize it?
It can be either. I don't think it's known. I certainly don't know what it is. The funny thing about allergy is a bad reaction that some people show to a substrate, that most people tolerate perfectly well. In fact, you can become allergic late in life to something you've tolerated all along before. People who move to North Carolina become allergic to the pollen of the pine trees of North Carolina, even though beforehand they have been exposed to pollens of pine trees elsewhere and did not show allergic reactions. So the allergic reaction is just a hyper stimulation of the immune response. The same immune system that responds to the vaccine sometimes hyper reacts.
Mm-hmm. And is there a way for someone to know that they would be allergic to the vaccine before actually taking the full vaccine?
That's the holy grail of allergy doctors. We would like to get there, but right now there is no simple prediction of who will become allergic and who will not become allergic. Hopefully, once it's clearly not a response that exists in majority of people. So what about the genetic makeup of those people who are allergic and hypersensitive, cause them to be so? Will require analysis of genomes that we have made good progress, but not all the answers are here now.
And Mr. K asked, if it doesn't stop infection, how does it protect the unvaccinated around them? And why do the fully vaccinated still need to wear masks and be careful around the unvaccinated?
Yeah. Well, I think in large, again, I'm the risk of, because we don't have much time, I'll simplify by saying that the job is to minimize exposure. you know. And what the masks do is they minimize the exposure. They don't block it completely. Uh, One doesn't understand how why vaccinated people can respond to, even though they have been vaccinated. Uh, but clearly, the studies of vaccinated people show that the vaccine works. If you just have to look at the number of people admitted with breakthrough infections to my hospital in Philadelphia, and realize that almost all of them have not been vaccinated. Very, very few of those that had been vaccinated experienced the severity of symptoms that require hospitalization. So, this is not a perfect world. It's not a black and white kind of an answer. It's a complicated answer that most people react fine, some people don't, and we need to understand why.
Yes, and from what I've understood also from studies in Israel, there is signs that these, since Israel was among the first to vaccinate a high percentage of the population, they found that there's been a decline in the immunity over time after receiving the vaccines. So this is the basis of the booster vaccine initiative.
That again is a feature of the immunization that's true of all vaccines, to all vaccines that we know, to the effectiveness of the cell that make antibodies, are not immortal, and the number of the cells declines, and therefore the amount of antibodies that it can produce will decline within time. That's the nature of the immune system, of the antibody arm of the immune system. We expect them to decline. It was not known before the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine were injected in so many people, what will be the life of protection endowed by these vaccines. But now we know it's a few months, and we'll have to. I mean, I'm perfectly happy to receive a booster shot, or even going to a regime that every year when I get my flu shot, I'll have to take a combined flu shot with anti-COVID.
Yes, and that's definitely what it looks like it is going to happen. And the waning of the vaccine is not homogeneous, right? It's happening more with older or immunocompromised people over time than with younger and healthier.
I wish I understood that better, but in fact, this is the focus of my research is about short-lived antibody responses versus long-lived antibody responses. We all know that we can get immunized against tetanus when we are teenagers and maintain antibodies in our bloodstream until well into our 60s and 70s, like I am. And then there are the other things that we have very short life of immunity that declines very rapidly. And so what is the distinguishing features that maintain long-term immunity versus short-term immunity? To me, it's a fascinating problem. I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried by it. I just think it's something that I would like to study, and I would wish other people would join me.
Yeah, yeah. It's very interesting, and finally, I wanted to show how this whole issue has become politicized, and here's an example of Rand Paul from Congress, who's basically put out a statement on his site. Let's see his statement.
It's time for us to resist. They can't arrest all of us. They can't keep all of your kids home from school. They can't keep every government building closed, although I've got a long list of ones they might keep closed or might ought to keep closed. We don't have to accept the mandates, lockdowns, and harmful policies of the petty tyrants and bureaucrats. We can simply say no. not again. Nancy Pelosi, you will not arrest or stop me or anyone on my staff from doing our jobs. We have either had COVID, had the vaccine, or been offered the vaccine. We will make our own health choices. We will not show you a passport. We will not wear a mask. We will not be forced into random screenings and testings so you can continue your drunk with power reign over the Capitol. President Biden, we will not accept your agency's mandates or your reported moves towards a lockdown. No one should follow the CDC's anti-science mask mandates. And if you want to shut down federal agencies again, some of which aren't even back to work yet, I will stop every bill coming through the Senate with an amendment to cut their funding if they don't come back to work in person. Local bureaucrats and union bosses, we will not allow you to do more harm to our children again this year. Children are not at any more risk from COVID than they are from the seasonal flu. Every adult who works in schools has either had the vaccine or had their chance to get vaccinated. There is no reason for mask mandates, part-time schools, or any lockdown measures. Children are falling behind in school and are being harmed physically and psychologically by the tactics that you have used to keep them from the classroom during the last year. We won't allow it again. If a school system attempts to keep children from full-time in-person school, I will hold up every bill with two amendments, one to defund them and another to allow parents the choice of where the money goes for their child's education. Do I sound fed up to you? That's because I am. I'm not a career politician. I practiced medicine for 33 years. I graduated from Duke Medical School. I've worked in emergency rooms. I've studied immunology and virology. And I ultimately chose to become an eye surgeon. I've been telling everyone for a year now that Dr. Fauci and other public health bureaucrats were not following the science, and I've been proven right time and time again. But I'm not the only one who's fed up. I can't go anywhere these days without people coming up and thanking me for standing up for them, whether I'm at work or at events in Kentucky, at airports, in restaurants, or in stores. People thank me for taking a stand. They thank me for standing up for actual science, for standing up for freedom, for standing against mandates, lockdowns, and bureaucratic power grabs. I think the tide is turning as more and more people are willing to stand up. I see stories from across the country of parents standing up to the unions and school boards. I see brave moms standing up and saying, my kids need to go back to school in person. I see members of Congress refusing to comply with petty tyrant Pelosi. We are at a moment of truth and a crossroads. Will we allow these people to use fear and propaganda to do further harm to our society, economy, and children? Or will we stand together and say, absolutely not, not this time, I choose freedom?
All right. I watch this and my blood is curdling as I find it despicable that he's using this so cynically in a political way. In fact, he's put it on its head. He's claiming that the politicians that he's criticizing are the ones who are using fear and propaganda. In fact, he's doing exactly that. And I just, to me, it's reprehensible. He probably knows better, hopefully knows better, but to make it sound like it's a tyrannical mandate, to a tyrannical edict that they're trying to impose on the population by having them wear masks, it's absolutely ludicrous in my opinion. It's not... Wearing masks is not anything detrimental to your health, and nobody's suggested making mandates for getting vaccinations. The most that can happen is that certain professions, the employers may use a requirement for vaccination or having testing done on an ongoing basis. So his whole claim here is just completely exaggerated, and it's a shame. He's calling Pelosi and other politicians tyrants, where where they're just following the scientific recommendations, and none of the Dr. Fauci or the CDC or whatever have in any way any motivation to harm the population. So I wondered if do you have anything to say about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's just, he's just inflaming, unnecessarily inflaming a lot of things. And he's using the same thing that the doctor that we saw talk to the school board in Indiana was using, conflating issues and ratcheting the intensity. And as he speaks, he starts more and more to use more and more defamatory languages and defamatory terms. I don't think that it needs to be raised to that level. It also ignores some political realities. I mean, he as a Republican should take credit and to the development of vaccine under the administration of the previous Republican government, the Republican president. So I don't see it in terms of Democrats versus Republican, Pelosi versus the rest of us.
Yeah, in fact, Trump the other day was booed at his own rally after suggesting that people should
wear a vaccine, to wear a mask. Yeah, right.
Not to wear a mask, to get the vaccine.
To vaccinate.
Yeah. So there it is. All right. Well, we do. The reason I've decided to cover this topic is because I do have empathy with people who have concerns. There's been a lot of crap in the media, a lot of contrary information and not so accurate information, and so it is important for everyone to be able to make their own mind as to the vaccine. In my mind, it is quite clear that the risks of getting COVID are at this point much more severe and dangerous than getting a vaccine. So that is my conclusion after doing my own research on it. But I certainly have empathy to anyone who's trying to sort these issues to themselves. So I hope we've helped some, and I'd like to thank you for joining me on the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in, and I hope to see you on our upcoming shows and the No Joke on Saturday and at 1 Eastern Time, and also next week we will be covering the aspects of cryptocurrency and its impact on the environment or not, and so forth. So join us again. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.